There was a time when picking up a console was undeniably the best gaming experience, but as the 10s rolled around, PC ports became better and graphics cards became proper standardized, meaning that if you bought a game, unlike in the previous decades, you knew that game worked on your PC. I've personally always had a foot in each camp. I like playing my strategy games and my modded RPGs on PC, and I enjoy my cinematic experiences and my action games sitting on the couch clutching a controller. But with Game Pass coming to PC and the wireless controller experience being accessible with just a dongle, I found myself turning on my Xbox One less and less. And when I had to rearrange my PC setup, I put it in one of my cabinets, and 3 months has passed since then. But I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna find a use for my Xbox One because I don't like throwing things out, and I'm gonna find a use for it by attempting to connect it to my old B&O CRT TV, or old Bang Bang as I call them. Welcome to my Xbox One on a CRT adventure. So first, being the cheapskate I am, I tried getting my Xbox One to run on my old CRT with this questionable cable that I bought on eBay. See, I'm far from technologically inclined, but even I know that this thing, the thing that outputs 1080p, 720p or even 480p at its lowest setting, is gonna need a cable with some sort of box thing on it that can convert that 1080p, 720p or 480p signal to something that the TV can understand. And surprisingly, this HDMI to AV cable thing without a dongle can't do that. Just to be 100% sure that it wasn't the port or the TV itself that was an issue, I hooked up my pink PS2, another dumpster find, and it played just fine. After doing some research, I concluded that I needed a cable with a box thing on it, so I ordered one of those, and when it arrived a few days later, I was reminded that I also needed a SCART cable, which of course I do not have because I threw all mine out 6 months ago thinking that I would never need one of those again. Throwing things out that I don't need and then finding a need for them shortly after throwing them out is and will forever be my curse. Well, I could have ordered a SCART cable, but as we've established, I'm cheap and I also didn't want to wait another couple of days for that to arrive in the mail before I could take advantage of my beautiful CRT. So I got on my bike and then Alfred and I set out on a quest to find a SCART cable, a quest that would take us to the local recycling station. Alfred is my dog, by the way, and he's the dog in the footage you're seeing. He's a working spaniel and the ideal dog for me and my dumpster diving adventures. But enough about my mutt. As we come around the bend in the road, we are almost at the dump. I would show you the dump itself, but I saw someone there that I knew, so I panicked and turned off my camera because I'm not ready to share my YouTube persona with my real life acquaintances. But to make up for it, here's an unrelated shot of the electronics bin where I find cool things. And yes, I did find a SCART cable in the electronics bin. There was a DVD player that had been shocked and it had a SCART cable still attached, so I liberated the cable and took it with me home. And I hooked it all up and voila, we have an Xbox One on a CRT. And now I can show you the might and the majesty of a CRT, or do my best to try, as capturing a CRT's bled together lines and glow isn't quite possible to do, but I will do my best. But to really capture the feel and nostalgia of a CRT, allow me to set up a scene. Imagine this, you're out and about, it's the beginning of February and you and your best furry friends are walking on the beach. It's a rare sunny day, the wind is pinching your skin and the breaching waves are nibbling at your ankles. This was every Sunday during my formative years growing up in the house right over there, because according to my mother, day in front of the TV had to be earned through labor and a good walk with the dog. And you know what? She wasn't wrong. I know no better feeling than going out on a wilderness adventure with my furry friend, experience the majesty of nature and the realness of the real world. Only to then pack him in the back of the car, head back home and into my dungeon, and then turn on my glowing friend. He exudes a certain warmth that, while doing nothing for big epics like The Witcher, adds a certain charm to cyberpunk classics that make good use of lighting and color. Shows like Altered Carbon and movies like Blade Runner. And there's just something nostalgic about watching a horror movie on one of these big old clunkers. It reminds me of inviting... who am I kidding? Getting my friends to invite girls over so that we could watch scary horror movies in the hope that it would scare them straight into our arms. And movies like Mandy, which is on screen, are just not the same on a flat screen HDR 4K TV. On this big old bad boy, the colors bleed together and it's almost like the film is oozing out of the screen, and it's a magical experience. But unlike the Xbox One's marketing, we're here for the games, so let's have a look at them. The natural starting point is of course the retro titles available on the system, and a game like Crazy Taxi feels just like the day it did when it was unleashed into the arcades around the world. And there's just something about that pulsating massive screen lighting up the room and the empty bass sound that just tickles my nostalgia bone. And that is quite an achievement, seeing as I never actually played Crazy Taxi when it was new. I did however play Banjo-Kazooie, and as I turned on the game to capture footage, I just sat there and looked at the demo playing, and that was an experience all in its own. And as I was looking at the screen, something just hit me. I couldn't hit the play button, because I knew that in that moment, if I started playing the game again, in that small dark room in front of a hulking CRT, I wouldn't be able to stop myself. So I moved on to Shenmue. Shenmue isn't great, it is a rushed port, and the developers that ported this had zero love for the game. Instead of taking their time with it and reworking the game itself to work on a widescreen display, they did the absolute bare minimum. And while regular gameplay looks fine, it is jarring when the cutscenes play, as they weren't reworked to fit a widescreen resolution. And on a CRT, this means that the screen shrinks to a vertical rectangle, and it makes me sad to look at, because this is such a beautiful and unique game, and I wanted to experience it on this CRT. But this is obviously not the version to go with for that. A final retro title I played was Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon, and while that is technically a new game, you wouldn't be able to tell from my footage. This looks and feels and plays exactly like the original Castlevania did, down to how the sound is reproduced through the CRT speakers, and how the vibrant colors bleed into each other, giving it a look that if reproduced on an LCD would look cloudy and gross. Moving on a couple of generations, I next tried some backwards compatible Xbox 360 games, and here I discovered something interesting. The Xbox 360 right out of the box came with the red, white and yellow RCA cables, as was the standard for media units when it launched in 2005. Due to this, my thinking was that the system would be perfect for CRT, especially earlier titles on the system, as they were released in a period of time when CRTs were still around, and therefore probably accounted for that in their design. I was wrong. Older titles like GTA 4 released in 2007 and Oblivion released in 2006 were horribly muddled messes that were a chore to navigate through. Distant objects were hard to make out, the browns and the greys bled together on screen, and playing through either was like walking through a dirty, gross mess. Speeding down a street in GTA 4 was almost impossible, as incoming objects didn't properly materialize from beyond the pixely haze until it was too late to swerve out the way. And the deep, dark, dank dungeons of Oblivion that are occasionally hard to make out on a modded system was even harder on the CRT. And due to the enemies blending into the background, it was more like fighting off a bunch of chameleons with pokey sticks than it was fighting off a gallery of colorful fantasy creatures. Curiously though, as I moved on to the games released in the 2010s, things became better. New Vegas, which can be kind of bland to look at, looked great. Its oranges and its yellows became much more vibrant and breathed some much needed life into the visuals. And the open vistas of the game, where enemies were clearly distinguishable from rocks and cacti, made the game a lot more enjoyable than Oblivion. Moving on to titles that came out proper late in the console's life, like Forza Horizons and Resident Evil Revelations, were a revelation. These games that released at a time when CRTs were out and HDMI 1080p signals were the norm looked great. Forza looked crisp and clear, and even though the game was much faster paced than GTA 4, I found myself crashing less and being more aware of my surroundings, as they were presented much better and more visibly. And Resident Evil Revelations, let me tell you, this game is so bad. It's so dumb. The part on the ship that looks like fun, well, that is fun, but it only makes up 1/3 of the game, and the rest is stupid filler where you control dumb characters through dumb subplots and flashbacks and flash forwards, and it's a fucking drag. But gosh, this CRT makes me almost want to go through the entire game again, because the curved nature of the CRT and the 4:3 aspect ratio makes this already claustrophobic game set in tiny corridors on a ship an even more claustrophobic game set on tiny corridors on a ship, and I loved every second that I got to play of this. And even though I know all the enemy placements more or less, I still found myself being a tad nervous as I made my way around every corner. But the real surprise of my CRT adventure was the modern games. While font sizes in indie darlings such as Tacoma and The Outer Wilds proved to be a challenge to interpret, and games like The Witcher 3 seem to be a little bit too cluttered, I'm sure that these are obstacles that I could have overcome if I sat closer to the screen. Despite these challenges to overcome, these games on a CRT, these games on my CRT, these games on my old high-end B&O CRT from 1996 look amazing. Mankind Divided, a Deus Ex game that takes place in a dystopic future where all colors but yellow and grey have been outlawed, takes that yellow and boosts its yellowness to a point that the hard contrast it creates against the greys becomes almost an aesthetic in its own. And while I've stated this several times in this video, the feeling of actually feeling the glow of a CRT and a specific color is transformative. It turns this game that I otherwise don't really like into an experience that I have a hard time putting down. Games like A Plague Tale initially look like they won't do great, as the opening cinematics treats us to a blindingly light visual that washes out all color. But as the titular plague starts spreading and we descend into the swamp of fake France, the CRT handles the reflecting pools and the glow of the torches brilliantly. No piece of technology handles black like a CRT. It's able to display this lack of color with such depth that it looks like it's almost sucking you into the tube. And as I made my way through the dark exteriors of the game, the annoyance of the small UI elements quickly faded away, and I was completely enveloped in this experience. For my final game, I wanted to once again try a zombie-filled experience, to once again get that immense sense of dread that only a claustrophobic aspect ratio of a CRT can reproduce. I found this experience in World War C, an otherwise mediocre Left 4 Dead clone that I can only really recommend to those suffering from motion sickness from playing first-person games, or to those that have completed every map in Left 4 Dead 2 on every difficulty in every game mode multiple times. Because while World War C is a Left 4 Dead clone, it isn't a perfect one. It's more like attempt 57 out of 271, where Left 4 Dead's AI director adapted to the actions of the players and balanced out the number of zombies and weapons accordingly. World War C does not. Weapons are just there, and zombies will spawn whenever the player runs over an invisible trigger, and these triggers are so blatantly obvious that it almost pulls you out of the experience. I say almost, and I'm sure that if I was playing this on an LCD screen, I would say completely. But I played this on a CRT, and on a CRT the bad AI design became white noise pretty quickly. Creeping through the bright mall was like watching the remake of Dawn of the Dead for the first time. And the aspect ratio, you know, the ones that's claustrophobic? Yeah, I might have mentioned that feature once or twice throughout this video. That feature hides a lot of the game's bad design choices. And would you look at these vibrant reds? There's no amount of bad game design that can sour the experience of a red this vibrant.
Both gonna talk!
So that was my CRT. I fully expected to set this thing up, play some games on it and then forget about it. But that's not been the case. Every night when I'm slumped over my desk trying to get a design ready for a client and I feel the sleepies creep over me, I turn off my computer, turn on my CRT, and I creep into bed with Alfred for like 3 minutes until he fucks off, and I watch Netflix or YouTube until I'm one step off from entering dreamland. And then I turn it off and I go to sleep, and that's been my ritual for almost 2 weeks now, and it will probably be my ritual for many years to come. There's just something comforting about that glow it emits. And if you have a CRT and a modern console, I think you should introduce the two. And if you're thinking about getting a CRT, I think you should do that. This has been it for me. Until next time. Bye bye!